you all for coming. I hope the lecture can speak for itself, but let me say a little bit at the beginning. Lecture kind of came about in a strange way. The Matisse part that I'm going to talk about at the beginning of the lecture was going to be an example of a lecture about something that wasn't just about Matisse. And then I started writing the Matisse part, and he kind of took over. So that's how it ended up being about, the whole lecture being about Matisse. But the connection at first between learning and Matisse is kind of arbitrary. And that remains true for a while in the lecture. But it was in working on the lecture and looking at Matisse's paintings last year that he brought in the topic of contemplation. So by the end of the lecture, I hope that the two things come together in a natural way. The lecture has kind of three parts. The first part will take up this first painting we're going to look at from a certain direction. I'm going to talk about how that might be connected to learning. And then in the second part, we're going to stick with the same painting, but go at it from a different direction and try to think about learning going in a different direction in that part. And then we're going to leave the first painting, the Bathers by a River, behind and focus on a different painting, Matisse's The Red Studio. And that's the part where contemplation will come in. Before I really get going, I'm going to take a little bit of time just to point out some things about this painting. This is Bathers by a River. It's finished in 1917. It's at the Art Institute in Chicago. It's a very large painting. It's 13 feet wide and 8 feet tall. It's quite imposing. The figures are larger than life size. So I'll mention throughout a few times the sizes of some paintings, just because some of them are very big, some of them are quite small, but they all kind of look the same on the screen. I'm going to point out a few things that I'm going to come back to very quickly when we get going in the first part of the lecture, but just so we sort of have them in mind. So the first thing is the three standing figures. Although they're not clearly the same pose, so not the same figure, there's a sense in which, because they're very straight up and down, you could think of them as being rotated, right? One is facing straight out, one is sort of 3/4 turned, then we have the back view of the other one. There are a couple places, maybe particularly at the legs of this figure, legs and feet, also in the seated figure, where kind of see it in the same place, the same piece of the figure repeated in different positions. This black band I will make note of again in a few minutes. So those are some sort of visual things that we're going to think about. Another different kind of thing that's going to be, that I'll talk about in the second part of the lecture, not so much sort of strictly visual, but there's a way in which the figures in this painting seem to me to be kind of schematic, right? Not quite maybe like real people. And that seems to be connected to a sense of maybe this is clearly not a rendering of a naturalistic scene. There's something maybe symbolic about the figures, about the whole scene, maybe allegorical. So we'll come back to those things later. Okay, so why am I interested in this painting? I'm going to tell two stories about myself and Matisse. The first one is specifically about this painting, and this is sort of kicks off the theme of learning. I encountered this painting for the first time in a book maybe about 10 years ago. I don't think I'd seen it before. So I was reading this book. I was turning the pages, turned the page, I saw this one, and my first reaction, kind of immediate reaction I had was, that's a Picasso. And of course I knew that wasn't true. I knew it was a Matisse because it also looked like a Matisse, and just the context of the book made it clear that it wasn't. But I was thinking about that experience when I was working on this prior version of the lecture. And as I'll talk about in a minute, this is an example of what I want to call the this is that, these moments where we see one thing as another. So I'm going to talk about Picasso in relation to this painting specifically in a minute. But to sort of give a little bit more context maybe of, even though this lecture it's not an account of my journey with Matisse, but it does kind of run parallel to it. So I thought it might be good just to say a little bit more about where I started out in my own relationship to Matisse's paintings. So I came to Annapolis in 2008 to join the faculty at St. John's College. I had been living in New York for a long time before that, and occasionally I would be at the Museum of Modern Art, and they have some Matisse paintings there. And then I moved here. My wife and I had a young child. We were both starting new jobs. We were very busy. I didn't leave this area to go back to New York for many years, but I'd gone to the Baltimore Museum of Art a few times and saw the Matisses there. And I always had the kind of same experience when I would go there, which was they didn't do it for me. There was something about the paintings there that I didn't understand. I knew I wasn't getting something, and it kind of bugged me. And then finally, after, 5 or 6 years, I was back in New York on a visit, had some time to go to MoMA. I was walking around. I walked into the room with some Matisses in them, and I saw some of these paintings I hadn't seen in a long time. I kind of forgotten about them. And I was like, oh, those are the paintings I like. And that was another one of those moments where I knew that Matisse didn't paint paintings like that all the time. In fact, he painted paintings that mostly weren't like those paintings. I'm going to show you 2 of them in a second. And so that was another experience where I just knew that there was something that wasn't clicking with me about Matisse. That's kind of where I started out on this journey in the last year or so. This is one of the paintings that's at MoMA. This is the piano lesson from 1916. This is another large painting. It's not as big as Bathers by a River. It's about 8 feet tall, 7 feet wide. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to Bathers by a River. So a couple things we could note. The straight lines that sort of organize the space of the canvas. The colors are almost the same throughout. The green, the gray, the light blue, the pink are all also in Bathers by a River. One way in which this painting I think is quite different is that that's Matisse's son there at the piano. He doesn't look schematic or symbolic. Seems to me like that's a real person. This is a scene from Matisse's domestic life. So despite the similarity of style, there's a difference there. This is another painting that's at the Museum of Modern Art. This is Goldfish and Palette from 1914. So I just wanted to give it as another example of Matisse was making paintings that looked like this in those years. So here, the black band in Bathers by a River that I pointed out, right? We have a very similar thing here behind the goldfish bowl. Okay. I'll talk about the this is that for a minute. So, I saw bathers by a river. I said, that's a Picasso. Aristotle is interested in these kinds of moments. In the fourth chapter of the Poetics, he has a short discussion of imitation and that we take pleasure in imitations and representations, likenesses. And in that passage, he says this. So here's one sentence from Aristotle. The reason why we enjoy seeing likenesses is that as we look, we understand and infer what each is. For instance, that this man is that one. That last phrase, this man is that one, in Greek is just two words. It's two demonstrative pronouns, hutos, ekenos. So they're masculine, singular, nominative. So it seems to be referring to human beings. I take it that the kind of scenario that Aristotle is indicating there might be you see a picture, a drawing, a painting of someone that you know in real life, and you recognize them, and you say, that's that person, right? This drawing is that person that I know. It seems like he might already there also be thinking about Oedipus. Oedipus at a certain point realizes, oh, that guy I'm looking for is me, right? This is that. Okay, so part of what I'm interested in with Aristotle is that he says that when we have this experience, we understand and infer what each thing is. Those words are mathanein kai sulogizesthai. Mathanein could also be translated as learn. Talk a little bit as we go throughout about why we might need both learn and understand to translate that word. The other word, sulogizesthai, is the word that we get syllogism from, right? So we could think of it as, thinking something together. So the root word there is logizomai, like to count or reckon, kind of root meanings. So I've been thinking about this a little bit as, you could think of that word as to gather up things that are understood, and maybe even in a looser way, which I think is helpful in a sort of current idiom, making connections, right? That's thinking things together, so we make connections. So the next part of the lecture, I'm going to try to take this is a Picasso moment and just see, is there anything to it? Did I really see something? This is a painting by Picasso called Two Nudes from 1906. It's also at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So the main thing here that I wanted to connect between this painting and Bathers by a River is, again, so these two figures, if you look closely, clearly they're not the same, they don't have the same pose. But I do get the sense that you could think of this as there's one figure rotated, right? I'm seeing simultaneously the same thing from two different vantage points. The other way, and this is sort of, just before Picasso really starts developing Cubism, you might even think, well, maybe the figures aren't rotated, maybe I'm being moved around. Maybe I'm in two different places looking at the same thing. This is a collage drawing from 1914 called Glass on a Table. So here, rather than, as in the previous painting, where we had something like the same thing separated, but seen from two different points of view, here, and Picasso was doing a lot of this in these years, putting, looks like different perspectives of the same thing on top of each other, like making them into one thing. So, for instance, like this part of the glass at the top, right, looks like that's one view of it. One thing that seems to happen in this way that Picasso does these things is like this, if this is different views of the glass put together, you can see how it's kind of become distended, right? I think that's probably more naturalistic. That's how wide the glass is. But here it's kind of stretched out, maybe because we're seeing around the glass, right? It's being sort of unfolded. And then this circular cutout of the wood grain thing, I don't think I would have thought this until I read an essay by Leo Steinberg called The Intelligence of Picasso. He talks about this piece. And he says, I think that's the top of the glass looking down on it. That makes sense to me. So again, I think we can see some of these things here. So having looked at this before, and then we've seen the two nudes from Picasso, right, we can perhaps think of these three figures as one kind of figure rotated in different positions. And then it's not quite the same thing. I don't think this is like different perspectives, but this putting multiple positions of the same thing. So the legs here, I think, have the same kind of thing, sort of over top of each other, is reminiscent of what we saw in the glass on a table. There's another version of this in the two figures on the right that's maybe less obvious at first. So this is a detail of the figure all the way on the right of the painting. You can see under so if this is sort of the main head, you can see under it another shape that's similar in the pink. It's a little rough on the edge there, but, and then from here, there's shoulders, right, coming down from that pink head. And so there's like sort of two versions of the same body, like one inside of the other. And then the way that the arm of the pink inside smaller body kind of connects up with the arm from the larger figure. It's even more pronounced, I think, in this is the second figure from the right. So you can see here, right, there's this shoulder that's quite well defined, it seems, right, comes right down into the arm there, but somehow is contained inside of the larger figure. So that was kind of quick. What I wanted to give us a sense for there was just to see how perhaps we could take that moment that I had of this is a Picasso and examine it, see what's inside of it, unfold it a little bit. And so I guess one way I've been thinking about this, again, this is sort of runs throughout the lecture, but it's not really thematized directly, is I want to say something like, when I saw the painting that way, right away, I understood something about it. Now, what does it mean to understand in that way, to understand kind of immediately and through seeing something? I'm not sure exactly. That's what I'm trying to figure out a little bit. But it looks like with some patience and looking at some other things, you see, oh, yeah, there was something there. There seems to be some connection between this painting and Picasso's work. And so this might be one kind of learning, that is, learning where you just have to be attentive to what you understand. See what you understand. And then, when you have that moment of understanding, see what's inside of it. So that's learning and Matisse from one direction. So now we're going to kind of go the opposite way. So started from this, seeing this one painting by Matisse, seeing it a certain way, seeing it as a Picasso, and seeing what unfolds from that. But it's not a Picasso, it's a Matisse. So what would it be like to try to see it as a Matisse? Well, that might involve searching around, looking for other things in Matisse's work that might help us see it that way. So I want to take a little detour. I'm going to do this a few times, use some examples from things that we study in the classroom at St. John's. So I'm going to talk about Euclid for a minute. So just as an example, Euclid 132. One of my favorite propositions. It's the one where we prove that the angles inside of a triangle are equal to two right angles. So what kind of learning could be involved when we get to that proposition, when we study it, think about it? So one way, which is not a way that I think any of us are really doing around here, is just a kind of rote memorization. Right? You could flip through the book. If you know how to read, you could get to that proposition. You could read the enunciation. Maybe you understand it in some sense. You don't really need to understand it to memorize it. Right? Someone could ask you, let's say you memorized all the enunciations of book 1. Someone could ask you, what's proposition 132 about? And you could repeat that back to them. Right? That would be one kind of learning, just sort of memorizing. As we know, however, when you actually work through propositions, and you have to go through the steps, you have to do the constructions, you have to see the connections between things, something else happens. It's not always clear, it's a little mysterious what it exactly is that experience is that's happening, but I think it's clear that when you feel like you've understood a proposition, you get to the end of it, and you arrive as a conclusion, the thing that was at the beginning in the enunciation, there's something different there. That's not just memorizing, right? There's a kind of understanding that happens there. Also, there's lots of understanding on the way, right? So it's not just a kind of blur from the beginning through to the end. There's steps. You have to see distinct things along the way. I'll note sort of just off to the side, because it seems in some loose way connected to thinking about painting and learning together, that in geometry, the kind of geometry that we do in Euclid and Apollonius, Lobachevsky, there are figures that we're looking at. So somehow our thinking is connected to seeing, spatial intuition, seeing things in relation to each other, not just logically, but in space. So all that I just said, we could sort of think about that just isolated to sort of one proposition at a time. But that's also not how we read Euclid. We're always thinking about how any proposition might be connected to other ones. And not just in the sense, like sometimes there are propositions that rely on others sort of inside of them, like you have to have proved one thing to prove the thing in that proposition. But there's other kinds of connections. So for instance, proposition 116 is very similar to proposition 132, right? Proposition 116 says that if you create an exterior angle in a triangle, the exterior angle is larger than either of the opposite and interior angles. That turns out to be, that has to be true from proposition 132. If you're already at 132, that the exterior angle is going to be equal to the sum of the opposite interior angles. So neither of them can be as big as the one on the outside. But then we start to notice things like, well, in proposition 116, Euclid hasn't started using parallel lines yet. So somehow what's proven in 116 is just like or almost the same as or similar to what's proven in 132, but you can't prove quite what he proves in 132 unless he uses parallel lines, right? So that's interesting. That's a kind of insight, right? That doesn't have anything to do ultimately with those two propositions alone, right? Starting to see kind of larger context. And then, the last kind of thing I'll mention in this with this example is, then you can start thinking about things like, why is the book organized the way that it is? Each book in Euclid seems to have a different subject matter. Why does he choose those? Why do they come in the order that they do? What are the relationships between them? Right. So we always end up asking things like, why does this book have? Why does it study numbers and geometrical figures in the same book? What's the relationship? Right? Okay. So let's see if we can do something like that with Matisse. This is a painting from 1910 called Dance. It's also a very large painting. I've never seen it. I think it lives in Moscow. The painting is the same size as Bathers by a River. We'll find out why in a second. This was one of two paintings that Matisse painted for a Russian businessman named Sergei Shukin. He commissioned them for the stairwell in his home in Moscow. Let's just look at the painting for a second. One thing that I want to note, just as different about it from Bathers by a River, there's no black, there are no straight lines. So we have figures again. We have something like a kind of idealized landscape, some kind of setting that's not quite, naturalistic. But the pictorial means that Matisse has used here are very different from what he was doing in 1917. So this is the companion piece that went to Moscow with Dance. This is called Music. So, of course, we can see the similarities, the same color scheme for the sky and the earth and the figures. There's 5 figures in each painting. So it looks like here the contrast is, like stillness instead of the movement that we saw in the prior one. So the documentary evidence is not very clear, but it does seem that Matisse was going to make a third painting. So he had the canvas, same size as Dance and Music, and there's some evidence that he was going to make a painting, a third one, with bathers. I think in a very general way, we could imagine what it might look like, right? It would have this kind of color scheme, probably would have 5 figures in it. I'm just going to go to the next slide. So this was a drawing, watercolor, that Matisse made in 1910 when he was making those other paintings. It gives us some idea, like it was a study for what was going to be the third painting. It gives us some idea of I don't think exactly what it would look like. It's a preliminary sketch. But it has the 5 figures, it has the divisions of the colors. I guess the one difference here is that we have water and not just earth and sky. And so, yeah, we can see that there's some connection. There's some connection here between what he was doing in 1910 and the painting that he ends up painting in 1917. So that's one kind of connection that I just wanted to explore, just to see there was a context out of which that painting arose that can inform how we see it. This is a painting called Bathers with a Turtle. This is from 1908, so this is a little earlier. Matisse made a couple paintings like this around this time. They all have a kind of quasi-narrative quality to them. Right? There's something's going on here. There's some kind of story. It's not clear exactly what it is. It has the sense to me of like it could be depicting a scene from a Greek myth, something like that. But no one seems to think that there's any particular Greek myth that this is supposed to be depicting. And again, as I had said, what I thought I saw in Bathers by a River, there's something, I want to call it symbolic, allegorical, something like that here, right? Again, the idealized kind of landscape sort of puts us in a kind of mythical setting. So I'll note also, sort of, a little quickly, but just to sort of fill out the context, that these paintings of sort of Arcadian scenes and ones sometimes with bathers, there was a tradition of such paintings in French painting for a long time. One of the people that made paintings like that are most proximate to Matisse was Cézanne. So this is a Cézanne bathers painting. Matisse bought this painting in 1899 from the man who would become his own dealer some years later. Matisse didn't have a lot of money at the time. I guess he really wanted the painting. He had to really stretch to afford it, and then kept it close to himself for a long time. If I'm remembering correctly, it wasn't even that it was sort of hanging in his home. He had it in his studio, right? It was with him like all the time when he was painting. So we've looked at a couple of different ways of thinking about how Bathers by a River is connected to other things in Matisse's work. So we saw its connection to dance and music. We see some of the similarities of the visual look of it to a painting like this, and it's part of this. Could think of it as kind of part of this tradition of French painting. I just want to mention one other way of seeing a connection, which is not something you can sort of see directly, but I want to say there's a mood in this painting. It's a little, the standing figure in particular, the anxiety that's sort of expressed on her face. It's not exactly calm, right? So there's something kind of idyllic in a certain way, but there's some tension, something unsettling. So here are Bathers by a River and Bathers with a Turtle next to each other. I don't think I can say more about it at this point, except for whatever this is worth, Bathers with a Turtle, as I was sort of been working on this lecture for about a year, this is the one painting that's helped me make the most sense of Bathers by a River. There's something, this earlier painting is the one in particular that makes me know that the other one is by the same painter. Somehow the same painter did both. And then I'm just going to end by pointing out, and we can think about what the significance of this is. Just the inclination of the head of the standing figure here, and the second figure in Bathers by a River, very similar, right? I mean, you can't know this kind of thing, but I would guess a little bit that there's some significance to that pose for Matisse, that it shows up 9 years later in the later painting. So just to return to Aristotle's words a little bit, he says again, when we see this as that, we learn or understand and infer. So that infer again was the sologisestai, thinking together, making connections, gathering things up. So I would just ask you, if you've had some experience like this, as I've been showing these things and talking about them, is there a kind of meaning or significance that's carried through by seeing those kinds of connections, by making those connections? And do you see the painting we began with in a different way than you did before we made those connections? Okay, that was the first 2 parts already. Third part's a little longer. I'm going to read a sentence from a piece that Matisse published in 1908 called Notes of a Painter, in which he tries to say something about his practice as a painter. He says at the beginning of the notes of a painter that he's dubious about painters writing things about what they do, and I'm a little dubious about it too. So I'm only going to make use of a very little bit of what he says. So here's the first sentence. He says, "I want to reach that state of condensation of sensations which makes a painting." I'm going to read that again because it's a kind of strange claim. "I want to reach that state of condensation of sensations which makes a painting." All right, we're going to try to figure out what that might mean. But one more detour into a mathematical text first. I'm going to talk about Newton's Principia for a second. So Newton's Principia is a very heterogeneous work. Here's a partial list of the kind of things you find in it: definitions, laws, mathematical lemmas, discrete propositions, discursive prefaces and scholia, measurements of phenomena, and rules for philosophizing. Those heterogeneous things are not just laid out sort of one after the other, and we just go through them. As we encounter different parts of the book, we have to incorporate things from other places in the book. So again, just to take as an example, Proposition 111. It's the proposition that connects elliptical orbits to inverse square law of force. So to understand the proposition, to make sense of it, it's not just a mathematical thing, because it's about a body in motion. And so you need to invoke the definitions and the laws. The proposition is about a force which is acting continuously but variously. So you have to use the math of the lemmas. There are connections to prior propositions, so those have to be kept in mind. And then, let's say you've finished with Proposition 111 and you've sort of moved on, and then you're in Book 3. It's only when you get to Book 3 and you start to talk about real phenomena, the moons of Jupiter, for instance, that you see the significance of what happened in book one, right? So as Newton does the work of establishing universal gravitation, you have to reach back to earlier parts of the book and then sort of bring all that stuff together. So one way I've been thinking about this is that the Principia has a big idea. And the big idea is mathematical physics itself. So this idea is not really stated anywhere as such in Newton's book, but it's there the whole time. And we have to think about it as we go, and we have to learn what that idea is. We have to really work through the book to get a sense of what mathematical physics might be. So it looks like Matisse has a big idea too. The idea is to turn sensations into paintings. So what does he mean by that? So there are two things that I think we might think it means, but I don't think Matisse means by it. So one is that he's not interested in faithfulness to perception. So he's not trying to have his sensations of the things that he sees and then translate them in some faithful way into his paintings. He's also not interested really at all, I think, in any kind of theoretical program about what painting should be doing. So some of his contemporaries had quite worked out ideas about perception, how perception works, how a painting should be made so that it evokes the same kind of experience that you have in nature. So that's not what Matisse is doing. Nevertheless, Matisse is very clear throughout his life. His biographer makes this clear all the time. Matisse was really committed to working from looking at things. So either he would have a model in his studio, or he's painting a room in his house, or he's going out into nature and painting a landscape. He wants to be looking at something. We'll come back to that. So here's the other sentence from Notes of a Painter that we'll work on. Matisse says, "Composition is the art of arranging in a decorative manner the diverse elements at the painter's command to express his feelings." So I'll read that one again too. "Composition is the art of arranging in a decorative manner the diverse elements at the painter's command to express his feelings." So there's at least a couple words there that I, for one, would like clarity on. Here's three of them: decorative, feelings, and composition. So let's start with feelings. What are these feelings about? They seem to be, from other things that Matisse had said, feelings that arise from looking at things. So he likes to look at things, he feels things, and somehow that's the source of his painting. It gets complicated, though, and he's clear about this too, that once he starts painting from looking at something and having feelings about it, he has to look at the painting too, and he starts having feelings about that, right? So it's not just he's looking at some real thing and trying to paint it. Now he's got a painting that he needs to attend to as well. Let's talk about the word decorative a little bit. It could seem like a pejorative term. Fine art is supposed to be beautiful, not decorative. Why would he use that word? What does he mean by it? So one way to think about it, I think, would be that he means that he's trying to elevate color and shape and line to be the primary things that painting are about. So not about the thing that he's rendering, but about those elements of painting itself. On the other hand, and we're sort of on the other side of this from where Matisse was, we might wonder, well, why doesn't he just make abstract paintings? That sounds like what he's talking about, right? Why does the painting have to look like anything in the real world? So I think that in part goes back to that Matisse, finds it necessary to ground himself in looking at things, not just at the painting. This is Matisse's painting, The Red Studio. This is from 1911. It's a moderately large painting. It's about 7 feet wide, 6 feet tall. I wanted to show it to you and just sort of have it in our heads as we continue. I'm going to end with this painting, but I wanted us to see it now. I want to try to lead up to thinking about this painting in connection to the quotes that I read from Notes of a Painter, and think about some more about particularly what arranging in a decorative manner might mean for Matisse. And along the way, we will try to connect that to contemplation. But one more detour before we get back to Matisse. So Aristotle again. Aristotle, as we know, talks about contemplation maybe most pointedly and fully at the end of the Nicomachean Ethics. And he tells us there that contemplation is the highest form of human activity. And he also tells us that we can't sustain it. It's too rarefied for us. So we can make attempts. Maybe we can do it for a little while, but then we sink back away from it. So in a way, those claims seem clear enough to me on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm left not knowing what he means by contemplation. It's a familiar word in English. It seems to me that when we use the word, we're often connecting it to, a kind of mode of thinking. Being still and thinking about one thing in a deep way or in an intense way. That's what contemplation would be. One thing that's unsatisfying about that to me is that it doesn't say anything about what we might be thinking about. And that might be important. Maybe we can't contemplate about just anything. So the word that we translate usually as contemplation is theoria. So this word has roots in meanings having to do with seeing, looking at something, a viewing, a beholding of something. So as I was working on the lecture, I started looking around other places in Aristotle where the word theoria was used, and it's used a bunch of times in the metaphysics, but in a different way. So this is the first sentence of Book Lambda of the Metaphysics. Aristotle writes, "Our inquiry is concerned with substance, for it is the principles and causes of substances that we are seeking." The word inquiry in the first clause, our inquiry is concerned with substance. That's theoria. I think it would sound totally wrong and bizarre if we put the word contemplation there. Our contemplation is concerned with substance. Doesn't quite sound right in English. So, but why is it the right word for Aristotle? So one way to make sense of that would be that the whole project of the metaphysics That is not the goal, but the actual work that you have to do. It's a difficult book. Lots of different things you have to think about, lots of arguments, lots of strange vocabulary. That's all theoria in the sense of bringing something into view. It takes effort to bring it into view. And then you have to keep it in view. How do you do that? I think you go back and you read the book again. You keep reading it. That's how you sustain the inquiry. That's how you sustain the contemplation, right? It's not, you don't arrive at a thought, one thought, and then just sit with it. I think you have to keep doing the work that brought you to it. Okay. We're going to look at a couple more Matisse paintings and sort of lead back up to the Red Studio. This is a painting from 1905. This is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. This painting is really small. It's like about this big. It's called Open Window at Collioure. So Matisse spent the summer in 1905 in Collioure. I think he went there with his family. He was lonely for, he missed his painter friends. So he started writing letters to people saying, like, trying to find someone to come spend the summer with him. So his friend Andre Derain took him up on it. They spent the summer painting together. They were both exploring something similar. The main thing, so we can see it in this painting, was trying to get away from two things. One, what's often called local color, that is, not feeling that you have to match the color of the thing in the world with the color in your painting. They could be different. The other thing was tonal modeling, so kind of like making things, shading things, light and dark, to sort of give them volume. So instead of those two things, Matisse and Derain started trying out just, what if you made a painting of vivid colors only, and don't worry about them exactly matching the thing that you're painting. So they started doing that, right? This is a good example, I think, of a painting that does that successfully. One way that we might think about what they've achieved, and I think they thought about it this way too, was that instead of trying to mimic light in the world, you make the painting its own source of light. Right? The painting itself gives off a kind of light. Another thing I wanted to note about this painting, it's connected to something I'll say later. It's not a huge thing, but a lot of things in this painting are kind of messy. I think that's important. It's an important thing about Matisse. If you go to the National Gallery, to the room where this painting is, there's a couple paintings by Derain in that room. I don't think they're from that summer, and they're similar to this in a lot of ways. They have these, thick dabs of bright colors sort of juxtaposed to each other. There's something kind of constrained and too careful about Derain's version of this kind of thing. Matisse is willing to let things be a little unruly. This is a painting from the same year, 1905. He painted this later in the year when he was back in Paris. This is a painting of his wife. He did a number of portraits of her throughout this period. I think this painting is usually referred to as Woman with a Hat. So I wanted to show it because it seems like it pushes even further in this direction of getting away from local color, right? colors, particularly say of her face, right, are probably not the colors that he was seeing. I think, too, this painting could help us with the idea of arranging in a decorative manner. That is, the whole surface of the painting now seems to be in play in terms of you have to think about what are the colors, where are they going to go, what are their shapes, how do they sit in relationship to each other. This is Blue Nude. It's from 1907. This is at the Baltimore Museum of Art. So I wanted to talk about this painting a little bit because of distortion, the distortion of bodies, figures in Matisse's paintings. I'm going to read a quote from Leo Stein. He was really Matisse's first financial supporter, was buying a lot of Matisse's paintings in the middle of the 1900s, 1905 and around that time. Stein says this about distortion in Matisse's paintings. He says, Matisse distorted more than he wanted to distort. He told me that at every beginning of a picture, he hoped that he could end without any distortion that would offend the public, but that he could not succeed. So this seems to me a helpful observation by Stein. We might think that, the figures in Matisse's paintings end up looking like this because he wanted them to, or there was some point he was trying to make, or he had some idea about why it was good to distort things, and so he did it. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So there's a line, the opening line and a half from a poem by Wallace Stevens that I have found sort of helpful in thinking about this. The poem is called Of Modern Poetry, and the opening of the poem is, the poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice. So I think this phrase, the act of finding what will suffice, is a good way of thinking about what Matisse might be doing. He doesn't have an agenda, I don't think, except to make paintings that he thinks are good ones. He worried about it all the time. He would be up all night agonizing over his paintings. His wife would read to him in bed for hours to try and calm him down. So one thing that's related to this, and this goes back to the messiness of the open window at Collioure, and this is one of the things I really had to work hard on to get my head around what Matisse is doing as a painter, is that especially from 1900 to about 1910, he was making all kinds of different paintings. They just looked so different from each other. So I don't think he wasn't searching for what we might think of as a style. His paintings end up having a kind of look. They look like Matisse paintings, but that wasn't important to him. He was trying to find what would suffice. All right, and I'm going to read another quote about this painting, which is amusing and I think helpful. So this is from a memoir by a man named Walter Pock. He was an American. In 1907, he had moved to Paris. He had studied art in the United States. Apparently, when this painting was being shown that year, he went to see it, and he was with Picasso. Picasso asked him, "Does that interest you?" And Pock said, "In a way, yes, it interests me like a blow between the eyes. I don't understand what he is thinking." And Picasso responded, "Neither do I. If he wants to make a woman, let him make a woman. If he wants to make a design, let him make a design. This is between the two. So despite the fact that it seems like Picasso is being critical here, it also seems to be insightful. That is, it sounds like what Matisse said he was trying to do, right? So if we think of design similar to arranging in a decorative manner, right, I think maybe Picasso was seeing something that was really there. This is Still Life with Red Rug, 1906. I chose this painting of one amongst many that we could have looked at, just to introduce, because this is going to be a motif for the next couple paintings, just to introduce the fact that around this time, Matisse started incorporating patterned fabrics into his paintings, especially still lifes and interiors. So one thing there that seems connected to what we've been talking about is that we think of things like patterned fabrics, rugs, wallpaper, and those sorts of things as decoration, right? Or they're decorative things. So he's bringing in the decorative to the painting. That's sort of on the one hand. On the other hand, it also allows him, I think, a kind of natural way to paint all over the painting, right? There's something everywhere to paint with the patterned fabric sort of in the scene. So this seems to be one kind of culmination of the early phase of that interest in patterned fabrics. This is Harmony in Red. This is from 1908. So it seems like he's really pushing the strategy here. The pattern on the tablecloth is the same as on the wall. The way that he has it arranged here, it's not that clear that the tabletop and the wall are not in the same plane, right? Everything is sort of brought forward. It kind of has a flatness to it. So there's a little bit of perspective drawing here with this side of the table, right? And we have the scene out the window. So there's some suggestions of depth and of a real space. But my sense of it is that it's very forward. It's hard to sort of get inside the space here. I only wanted to put this slide back up for a second to remind us that this was also 1908, right? So Matisse is painting paintings like this at the same time that he's painting these other paintings. Okay. So I'm going to hang the remainder of my remarks on maybe a kind of curious fact. If you read biographies of painters, sometimes the biographers will point out that they'll have all these records and papers and journals and diaries and things, and they'll say on such and such a date or in such and such a month, the painter ordered a large canvas from their supplier, or a couple large canvases. Often those orders of the large canvases seem to coincide with the painter's intention to do something significant, to make a major painting. So what I want to think about a little bit is what's happening at that moment, what's happening when the painter feels ready to paint a major painting, a large painting. Large is not in itself significant, but often they go together. So this seemed to be true for Matisse in 1911. He made 4 large paintings, which are all about the same size, about 7 or 8 feet wide, 6 or 7 feet tall. They are the red studio, the pink studio, the painter's family, and interior with eggplants. The Alfred Barr, who was the first director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, he wrote a book about Matisse, and he dubbed these 4 paintings the symphonic interiors. That kind of gives a sense of his sense of their kind of scope. So here's one of them. This is interior with eggplants. So it's similar, I think, to Harmony in Red, in that the pattern, especially this purple pattern, right? It's down here. It's also up here. That's supposed to be the floor, I think, right? But the way that pattern is put on there, it's just sort of coming up, at us, almost floating. But there are many more elements of this painting that, differently from Harmony in Red, that I think contribute to really feeling like there's a real space that you can enter into. So one of those is that there's lots of actual objects in the paintings that are themselves sort of flat planes, and they're sort of stacked on top of each other. So we've got I'm not sure what this is some kind of something with a pattern on it. This is a folded screen. It looks like there's some paintings, like that's a painting with the back showing, I think. Another painting here. So we've got these sort of things stacked up, retreating into space. This line here, right, is the edge of the floor meeting the sort of fireplace, and there's a mirror there. And although it gets interrupted by the other objects, if you trace it, right, it comes all the way up to the corner of the window, right, and then sort of we're outside. So all of this, and then the way that the eggplants are sort of sitting on that table. I don't want to tell you what you're supposed to see. I'm just telling you what I see. That here, I really do feel like there's a depth of space there, and the space is clear. It's sort of this crystal clear space inside of this room. At the same time that all of this pattern and the way it's painted sort of comes forward. So we have both things at the same time. Okay, so back to the Red Studio. In some ways, we have a similar setup in terms of what I'll call the drawing, right? We've got this line here, also perspective line where the floor meets the wall, sort of drawing us in, and then, roughly here it seems to be the pitch of the other wall. So that's giving us a sort of, from a drawing sense, the shape of the room and its depth. Unlike in Harmony in Red or Interior with Eggplants, aside from Matisse's own paintings, right? So all of the things that are sort of not red here are Matisse's paintings that are in the studio. We don't have this, patterned fabric or other kinds of patterns that are sort of coming forward. Nevertheless, if you are standing in front of this painting in person, and I actually took this photograph myself with my phone. There's a little bit of glare up here at the top. I thought it was a good one to use because it gives a little bit of sense of the kind of plasticity of the paint. So when you're actually looking at it, it's really quite noticeable. Like it's not the kind of painting where the paint seems to like sink into the canvas. It's really sitting on top of it. And so even though it doesn't have that pattern effect of coming forward, just the red paint itself is kind of like coming out. So one way that this is emphasized is that the outlines of the objects in the paintings, these sort of whitish outlines, are not painted on top of the red paint. They are absences of paint, right? So the red paint sits, it's closer to you than the thing that's being outlined, than the outline of the thing, right? You can see it particularly well in the most white parts of the vine on that plant. That's just blank canvas, right? So it's not white paint put on top of the red, right? The red's sitting on top of that. So even though this painting in some ways is less obviously decorative, right, because it's not using the pattern strategy, we might call it, I think it still fits what Matisse is after, right? That is to arrange in a decorative manner, even with just, I mean, haven't said anything about his own paintings in the painting. I'm not going to say anything about them. If we just think about the red, just that, it's all one color. It's still, I want to say, arranged in a decorative manner, right? It's laid out in a kind of precise way, right? It's not just the background, right? It's the design too. It was really this painting. I had a chance to be in New York a number of times last year, and I got a membership to MoMA, and so every time I was there, I would go in and I would look at this painting. And I didn't know early on that I was going to talk about it at all in the lecture, but it kind of convinced me that I had to, and it was this painting really that got me thinking about contemplation. So let me say a few things about that, and that'll be the end of the lecture. So if we think about learning again, I tried to say a few things about what learning and understanding might entail. But I think, too, that if we think about it a little bit, it might be the case that we should think that learning should come to an end. So that might be in some ultimate sense. I'm not going to take a position on that tonight. But if not in an ultimate sense, at least sometimes we should stop and gather up the things that we've learned, see what they constitute, sit with them. So I think this painting by Matisse is something like that. I think he, too, spent a long time trying to learn something, and he gathered it up here in this painting. So I'll just say that kind of thought one more time. So I think we must be able to gather up what we have learned and understood and see if it amounts to something. And if it does, we can and should sit with it for a time, retrace our steps, and think something whole and complete, at least for a moment. Matisse's Red Studio is that moment as a painting. Thank you.